I think it's going to tell everybody that it's recording in a minute. Hey, Steve, are we record? Oh, there we go.
Oh, there it is. Perfect.
Ta-da. It was just a little slow. Hi, Catherine. Thanks for joining us. I think you might be muted right now. We'll unmute you shortly afterwards. We're just going to let people join in. So 1, 2, 3. Let's get started. It's 4 o'clock. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Mary Donahue, and I'm grateful you've joined us at the Digital Wellness Center for our first live 2022. We're very excited to have everyone here, and we're also recording this for those of you who can't be here. Joining me today is my new friend, Jillian Climie, co-founder of The Thoughtful Co., a most amazing new initiative I came across because of my friend who introduced me to her. Jillian, today we're going to talk a little bit about women, negotiation, how to get what you're worth, and how to talk about money, which, believe it or not, are one of the top 4 pain points that cause people to burn out, cause them to become depressed, and cause them to leave their jobs. So if you're an employer watching this will be of particular interest to you. But if you're a woman who's about to go in and negotiate her salary for 2022 or 2023, I encourage you to pay attention, enjoy, and at the end, we're going to leave lots of times for questions, and also go to Jillian's website, Thoughtful Co. We're also going to be posting it on the Digital Wellness Center's website. But Jillian, given the time we have, and we always like to state a time, welcome. And I'm just going to jump right into our questions.
Awesome.
Let's just start with the number one question we had when we began saying on Monday we were going to do this. We put it out in public. You and I knew we were going to do it a little earlier. But it was, how can I negotiate an offer?
I think that's a great first question, and thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. And so interesting too, I didn't realize that compensation really contributed to, emotional burnout. So that was a great learning for me, and I'm excited to be helping hopefully reduce that. And yeah, so the overall question of how to negotiate an offer, it's definitely nuanced for specific people and specific companies, what level you're at, et cetera. But I think the main kind of 2 pieces of advice that I try to leave my clients with is to be confident, but start with respect, and to be concise, but impactful. So the first one being confidence is really know exactly what you want and what you're going to ask for, and be able to confidently and directly articulate that. And then also be confident in your value and what you're worth, and then the number you're asking for, which I know can be tough for women. And practice and sometimes faking it can go a long way. And the starting with respect, I find, is so great, because at the end of the day, a negotiation is a conversation between 2 people. So going into that, starting with respect, especially as a woman and some of the judgment we face, I find will get you a more positive response most times. And then the concise but impactful is really practicing your points, knowing the ones that really how you add value to a company, and what can you do that is unique to you that no one else can do for your employer. Practice them, prep them, and have a little concise speech, because I often find sometimes in negotiations it can be awkward, and we try to say a bunch of stuff and fill up the silence. But if you just have a concise little speech and then stop talking and kind of leave it to the person on the other side of the table to respond, that can be really powerful.
So as we're talking about really powerful, you've worked and helped people at the top companies in the world. How to help them negotiate an offer. And what just surprised me at what you just said was practice, have a speech. I'm a big believer in practicing, but I didn't know we'd have to have a speech. So if we're making this speech and we're writing it, one of the things that my friend shared with me was that they feel they're being very aggressive, and they're worried about being called the B word if they ask for more money. So how do they come across as not aggressive when they're writing this speech, when they're researching to find their worth, when they're demonstrating and have demonstrated their worth to their employer?
I think that's such a great question because as women, we do face bias and we are judged more harshly, and we can be seen as aggressive, whereas a man doing the same thing can be seen as confident. So I think that's the facts, and we know that, and it's frustrating. And I would say kind of two things to that is one, don't let it dissuade you from asking, because you need to be paid what you're worth. And then I think the second is, and this might sound strange, but a compensation negotiation doesn't need to be negative. You can frame it in a really positive way. So if you're, coming up to your performance review and want to talk about money, you can say, I love being here. I really want to stay here long term. I learned so much from you. And I just want to have a very open and honest conversation about compensation so you can know where I'm at. So it's almost framing it in a way where it benefits your manager or the employer, and being confident and clear in what you're asking for. But it doesn't have to be super negative. And I think we sometimes kind of build up in our heads that it's going to be an aggressive, negative conversation. And honestly, it doesn't have to be. And it's a part of your manager's job.
Yeah, I love that you said that. Come across as authentic and be authentic. Because we say at the Digital Wellness Center, being authentic is being healthy.
Awesome. Love that.
So now you're going into it. You're going to negotiate an offer. Just be settled with whether you're aggressive or not aggressive. You deserve this money. How do you know how much to ask for?
Yeah, that's a great question, knowing how much to ask for. It's tough. And I think I am an advocate for doing your research. So, Google, Glassdoor, Fishbowl, contacting people in your network who might have information. And I think, but also knowing that there are some limitations to that. So market data is one thing that goes into a compensation recommendation, but there's also time and role, experience, performance, how important that role is to the company. So know the limitations of the research that you're doing. And I will say, of so many of the clients that I've been working with over the past couple of months, so many do have a gut number that they know they want to ask for, and it's usually the right number, and sometimes they just talk themselves down from that. So I would say go with your gut. Yeah, go with your gut and don't talk yourself down from it. And like 9 times out of 10, it is right. So I find a lot of people actually know, but they're just nervous about that number that they know.
So if people are already nervous about their number, and they're already nervous about being negotiating, and now we're talking both private sector and public sector, and we're also, it sounds to me, talking at the charitable sector. You've got to do research and see what you can do and what you can negotiate. So now we're in this position. We're getting ready to negotiate with our manager, and as you said, it's part of your manager's job. They're expecting it. So is it better to negotiate for more compensation in person, over Zoom, or over email?
I love that question because I am an introvert and I would love to do it over email. But I would say, and kind of what I was talking about before, you need to be able to convey the confidence and the emotion, and make it a positive conversation. And you can't do that over email most times. So I do recommend in person is best. Right now, it's probably Zoom, which is fine. And then you can, make sure it's a positive conversation. And email, we know, can be perceived in 100 different ways. So you can just control how the conversation goes a little bit more. And so that's my overall recommendation on that. Of course, if you're a senior executive reporting to a CEO and you have 30 minutes with him or her 1 time a month, you might need to send an email prep. And so you're both ready for the conversation. You have time for it. But other than that, I would say try to do it in person. It's definitely more stressful, but you'll get a better outcome most times.
So you just talked about that. You just talked about different levels of negotiating in person. And I agree. I wrote a whole book on it. Don't ask for more money over email. But let's say we're in a Zoom, we're in person. Can we just walk through the steps to, negotiating and preparing your manager for a negotiation? Because I'm assuming no matter what level you're at, you don't just ask your boss while you're walking for coffee or you're on a Zoom call or you don't text them. So if you're in government, it must be a little different than if you're in the private sector. What is the best way to begin this negotiation process?
Mhm.
I'm a little lost on this. So if you could just take us back to, okay, I'm getting over my fear of being aggressive. I'm good. I'm totally great at understanding my worth. I've done tons of research. I'm
Mhm.
really prepared.
Mhm.
But now what do I say?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Like, how do you actually start the conversation, which is kind of the hardest part. And I think there are those, year-end reviews and stuff like that where you have dedicated time, and those are great. But if it's not a time like that, I would pick a one-on-one where you have space with your manager, and I would definitely start with it. Because I think the one thing is you don't want to kind of bring it up and then all of a sudden it's the end of your one-on-one and you're rushed and you didn't get across what you wanted to. Like, make sure you have the time. And
So
then
lead with money.
yeah, I definitely would, just be upfront about what you want to talk about. And I think I kind of usually recommend structuring it, starting off positive and saying, hey, I want to talk about my compensation. I love working here. If this is true, if it's authentic,
Right.
and I want to have an open conversation about it. And then kind of have 3 key points of what is really do you do for the company that adds a huge amount of value, usually to their key performance metrics. So if you're in growth mode, how are you adding to the growth? If you're focused on share price, how are you adding to the share price? And then what are things that you can do that are unique to only you? So kind of know those before, prep them, and then say your 3 points, and then directly say your ask. And then close with another positive. So kind of starting and ending positive usually works really well. And then over to your manager. And I think if you have that kind of structure going into it, it just helps guide the conversation when it is, it can be anxious and you're like, I don't know what to say. If you have a preset structure like that you've practiced, it really helps going into it.
So it's really just like every other negotiation you make in life. Like Dale
Mm-hmm.
Carnegie said, start with a positive,
Mm-hmm.
constructive, demonstrate your worth,
Yeah.
and close with a positive statement. And I think how you opened it was particularly salient for salary negotiations, which is, I do want to stay here, if
Mm-hmm.
that's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're not like threatening to leave the company or anything. Like, and it should be, you should have an ongoing conversation with your manager about compensation, which I'm learning is quite rare. And I think I've been lucky because I've grown up in compensation. So I'm just used to talking about it all the time. But, it should be something where it's not a taboo subject, and your manager wants to know if you want a bit more money instead of leaving the company, especially right now when there's talent wars happening, great resignation, etc.
So can we just really quickly go into this process? Is it different? I know my colleagues in the government can't necessarily say, oh, I want this much money, where you could probably say that in private sector, or could it, and it must be different in the charitable sector for negotiations. What are some slight nuances to that? For example, if I'm going and I'm negotiating, say, for example, at TD, I know what the fee structures are and I know what I can get and what I can't. Same with the government. But if I'm at, Microsoft or something, they have set standards, but to keep you, they may change it. So what do you do here?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And it can be really different at different companies. And my biggest advice is just ask. Like, if it's a black box and you don't know, you can ask, do we have a bonus structure? Do we have an equity structure? Are sign-on bonuses available? And again, it's not, if you are just asking in a generally curious way, it's not aggressive. And I think, yeah, if you're working at Microsoft, there's going to be strict pay bands about how much salary you can make, but there could be really flexible one-time equity grants. So there's lots of kind of unique things that not everyone thinks about. And I think so asking, and then if you're in a position where, you are negotiating an offer and you have no idea what those different levers are, you can ask an expert. So I support with that. And I know there's some, lawyers who can review equity kind of contracts and that kind of thing. And so I think also don't be afraid to leverage experts, because it will, usually get you more money than you're paying for a session.
And that is your job.
Yeah,
That is what the Thoughtful Co does.
Yes, yeah. And I love doing that. And it's great to see, someone be walking away from a bunch of equity and then not knowing she could negotiate that as a sign-on bonus and stuff. Like there's kind of unique things like that where we can support that people just wouldn't really think about.
So that brings up two more questions, and I need in your answers if you could also tell us a little bit more about what your company does, because I think it's awesome. And I know I didn't get into it in the intro, but now feels like a really great time to talk about it. So when you're going to have this conversation and you've decided you're going to have it on your monthly Zoom, you've prepped your manager, you're ready, you know what's going on, do you give them a range or a number, or do you let them give it to you? Do you tell them you want equity? Do you tell them you want more vacation? Do you bring up market data? Do you bring up inflation? And then, you talked about equity. How do you know how much my equity compensation is worth? So let's just wrap all three. So let's just start with A, should I give them our number?
I love this question, and because I feel very strongly about it, and different people have different perspectives, but I do believe you should give a number. And I think it's because, if you're giving a range, it opens it up to flexibility, to discussion, and it just shows that you don't know exactly what you want. If you give a number, it's clear, it's confident, and they directly have to respond to that number.
Right.
I think if you're in an intro call with a new job and you want to give a range at that point, I think it's fine. But if you're going towards the end of a negotiation or you're asking for something within a company, I definitely recommend doing a number. And then, your second point around equity compensation, I think that's definitely something that we handle a lot at the Thoughtful Co, and I love it. It's complex, but interesting. And so basically that is compensation that pays out over the long term and is linked to the share price of a company, whether it's private or public. And it's usually a bit higher risk than a bonus or base compensation because it's performance-based, but it can be higher reward. So really great to understand your equity thoroughly. And I can say I've had met so many people in my career who are high up and, such intelligent people, but still, it's just one of those things that is hard to understand. It's like a mortgage agreement. Like I just signed one of those. I didn't fully understand it. With equity compensation, it's similar. So many people don't understand the nuances. So I'd really advise getting HR or your manager or the hiring manager to walk you through how it works, get the equity agreements, get the plan text, take the time, because if you understand it, you can really leverage it in negotiations. And you can also understand, what money you're going to be getting over the next few years and what you might have to pay in taxes that you didn't know. So there's a lot of complexities with it, and I really recommend digging into it. And that is something the Thoughtful Co does as well. We do support on valuing equity compensation and education around that, just because it's such a complex topic that's kind of a black box a lot of the times.
So my other question was, should you in these negotiations bring up market data? Should you bring up inflation?
Inflation's a good one right now because it's obviously it's a big topic. And I think my one point around inflation is if you're bringing it up in a year-end performance review, let's say, it's not, it doesn't drive the point home because that impacts everyone in the company. So why give more money to you when, they have a pool and everyone is dealing with inflation? Market data, I think it's great to have back pocket. I think it's also important to know there's lots of other factors that go into compensation recommendations. So I would start with you and the value that you bring and what you add, because that's not negotiable and that's unique to you. And then if needed, you can have that back pocket, but I wouldn't kind of have that as your rationale for the recommendation. And one question I wanted to ask you is, just as we're talking about this, I know imposter syndrome is something my clients bring up a lot. And I know you've kind of looked into that and researched it, and wondering if you have any thoughts around how to combat imposter syndrome.
I do. And I have so many more questions for you. I think, it goes back to your first question about feeling aggressive and worrying about being aggressive. And the first thing that you need to start doing is stop worrying about that. people are going to have an impression of you one way or the other. And typically, in my experience, work speaks for itself. Your work speaks for itself. So let's just go directly to the work and killing imposter syndrome. And this goes for men, women, it goes for everyone because we're all suffering from it. I suggest a journal, and I've got an example everyone can grab on, I think, your website, my website. We have a daily journal that helps you keep track of 3 goals you want to accomplish. It builds in some micro break for you, but it also just gives you one-word answers, and it's a one-word journal. Why is that important? Because what many of us don't realize is when we're going into these compensations, the reason we feel like an imposter is we don't really know what a good job we've done. But if you begin to journal it, then you're collecting data. And then you can cross-reference that data on everything you just talked about in our conversations 1 through 8. So if you're going in to negotiate an offer, you can actually say, on average, I have 4.5 meetings a day. I answered this many emails. This is my results on how I helped move my team forward. When I'm talking about a range or a number, on average in the market, what I'm seeing is. But you can't do any of that and give personal examples, which, speaking from personal experience, really moves a manager because it triggers the reticular activator for them to say, oh my gosh, yes, she did do that. I totally forgot. But if you have these journals that you take 3 minutes to do in the morning and just check it out, say, what are your 3 goals or 3 projects for today? What are you working on? And you're going to find out. Then some of those things stick around for a long time.
Yeah.
And you're also then able to identify your pain points. And so imposter syndrome comes from not being sure really that we are good enough to do what we do. And here's the facts. You wouldn't be hired right now if you weren't good enough to do. People play mind games with you all the time to see how they can get you to do much, much more work. And they don't mean to. It's just how our digital world works. And so what you want to be able to do is take a step back and say, holy, I've gotten this. I've got it down pat. And that way, when you go in to negotiate, you can really begin to understand what your, if you're talking equity, what your sweat equity is actually worth, what you're doing, how you're doing it. And that also helps you prepare for another question I'd love to throw back to you if I've answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. No, and I love that. I think that like actually having the research and data to prep you in advance is such a great tool.
Yeah. I usually, before I go into any negotiation, depending on where it's going, I usually gather data for at least 3 to 6 months. And I gather data as well on the other person. And so that helps prepare you for the next question. And let's end with this and then go to our audience and see if they have any questions. But what happens if they don't do anything on my compensation ask? What happens if they don't budge? What happens if they just give me a little something like a 1% and I was asking for a 10%?
Yeah, I think this is a good question. And I would say if you're within a company and you've made an ask, I think know that just making the ask will have an impact. And even if you don't get something right now, it's now in your manager's head or HR's head. And next time there is funding or there is a year-end review, they'll be thinking of you. So sometimes it is longer term results. And I think also understand why not now. And that's the great thing, that your manager will have to provide you that feedback if the answer is no. So make sure you hold them accountable to that, because that is their job. And then you can understand how to get there. Which is great. And I think if you're going to a new job offer, this is definitely happens. You ask for something and it's a straight up no. And I think in those situations, you can get a little creative. So if you've asked for X amount in base salary and they say no, you can say, well, maybe can I get a sign-on bonus to bridge the gap for a little bit? So just ways that you that make you more comfortable. You're still getting something that you wanted. But it's kind of more of a middle ground between the two. And then also evaluating, if it's not the amount you wanted, is it worth it? And be able to walk away if it's not, and know your value.
Right. So also do your homework and see what other options are available to you to move, to transfer,
Totally.
all of those things. My sense is you don't want to hang it over someone's head, though, when you're entering into that positive negotiation that we talked about in the beginning.
Yeah, and I think if it is a no, then you've made your point and it's over to them, and they know they could lose you for that. So know your power in the negotiation as well. You likely have other opportunities to go to.
And I think, again, you have to sit back and take a breath and realize this is your worth. But I think you also have to talk a little bit about how finance plays into depression.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't feel you're getting paid what you're worth, you begin to resent. Remember, I said those 4 points.
Mm-hmm.
You begin to resent your colleagues. You begin to, once you start that feeling of resentment, you're not engaging as quickly. And if you're not engaging as quickly, you begin to spend more time on LinkedIn, and you begin to, you can always tell that. Like, that's an interesting point in the data. I always know whoever's looking for a new job by how much they're on LinkedIn.
Right.
So, it's like, oh, okay, I guess I should think about hiring you if you're interested. I wonder what happened. And 9 out of 10 times in an exit interview, it's like, I just didn't feel I was getting paid equal. And that's particular for women. I've left a job for that. I left a fantastic job because I found out by accident that the man I hired was making more money than I was.
Wow. Yeah, that's tough, and that's good that you left in that situation.
Yeah. I have an Irish temper. What can I say? I just walked out. Probably not the best, most graceful exit. My issue, nobody else's. But yeah, I was pretty pissed.
Yeah,
so,
that's fair.
Yeah. Let's conclude with your final thoughts. Like, give us 2 quick steps, and let's see what happens. And then we'll see if anyone has any questions. They can put them in the chat, or we can unmute everybody. You just let me know.
Yeah, I'll conclude with just, I guess overall, know your worth, and especially right now, we're in the Great Resignation, talent wars. It's a great time for women to be bringing up negotiating, and I think it's also, pay equity is such a hot topic. Employers want to do the right thing right now, so I think know that and know your power, and use it. And then I guess my last point would just be around what we do at the Thoughtful Co. So we do support women in understanding and negotiating their compensation, as we've talked about. And then we also advise employers on recruiting and retaining women. So really trying to create an equitable workplace from both angles, women and employers. And yeah, if you want any more info, our website is thethoughtfulco.net.
I think it's the most amazing company. I wish it was around when I was younger. I can't wait. And I'd love to do another talk with you for young women entering into the workforce, because I feel like they need this information for their mental health. They need to know the options that are open for them, because I don't think as women we have money conversations as often as men do.
100%. Yeah, I 100% agree. We don't really talk about it within each other. Like, it just, it's not really talked about. And we don't have the networks to facilitate it like men do.
No. So with that, I'd love to open it up to our guests if they have any questions. Steve, can you unmute our guests for me? If they want to be unmuted. Do any of our guests have any questions, or would you prefer to put them in the chat? I think I just got a text. Go ahead. Does anyone? So the text that I just received asks, I don't feel comfortable talking to my manager about money. Should I leave?
I mean,
Sorry,
I think
that's if I don't feel comfortable talking to my, I didn't put my glasses on.
I think, I guess I would, like, that is your manager's job. Yeah. So if it's non-topic for your manager, then I would go to HR. I don't think you should leave a company because of that, unless there's other things going on with your manager beyond that. But I think HR, at most companies, HR is there to talk about these kind of things. You can bring it up and they can facilitate a conversation with your manager, or just take it on themselves if you don't want to get that person involved. So I definitely don't think it's a reason to leave the company right away. And there should be resources and other avenues for you to go.
Excellent. Well, Jillian, I don't see anyone else with any questions on this amazing topic. So thank you.
Thank you for
very,
having
very
me.
much.
Yeah,
and I look
fun.
forward to our next chat. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.